I was away on a business trip when my parents sold my dream house to fund my brother's luxury trip. When I returned, my dad grinned, "Your house paid for their fun." I smiled again. Frustrated, he barked, "What's so funny?" I replied, "The house you sold was." This isn't just a story about losing a house. It's about a betrayal so deep, so gut-wrenching, it shattered my entire world, all at the hands of the very people who were supposed to love me most. What would you do if your own family sold your home, your dream, just to fund their lavish lies and your brother's endless indulgences? My name is Garrett Miller, and at 34, I'm an international marketing consultant. I've been living independently since I was 18, when I left my middle-class home in Pasadena, California, determined to make my own way. I'm not one to dwell on the past, but to truly understand what happened, you need to know how I grew up, in a family where love always seemed to tilt in one direction. My parents, Robert and Linda Miller, were ordinary people, living what looked like ordinary lives. My father worked at a bank. My mother was a freelance accountant. We had a small house with a white picket fence, a minivan, a life outsiders would call stable. But inside that house, things were anything but stable. I have a younger brother, Brian, for years my junior, and from a young age, I could feel the stark difference in how my parents treated us. Brian was the golden boy. Always. He was lazy, never holding a job for more than 6 months, but my parents? They always sheltered him, always made excuses. Brian's still finding his way, my mother would say, even when he quit his 5th job because his boss just didn't understand him. Meanwhile, I worked my butt off. I paid my own way through college, juggling 3 jobs, waiting tables, delivering packages, working as an office assistant, just to graduate debt-free. I didn't resent it then. I truly believed my hard work would pay off. And I had one person who always believed in me, truly, my grandfather, Norman. Grandpa Norman was my rock during those tough years. He was a tough man, a construction worker with rough hands, but the warmest heart. He'd sit with me on the porch, telling stories of his youth, how he built his life from nothing. "Your strength is your true asset," he'd say in his deep, steady voice. "Money, houses, cars, they're just tools. But your will, Garrett, that's something no one can take away." Those words etched themselves into my mind, a small flame guiding me through countless exhausting days. When he passed away, I was 18. He left me a trust fund, a sum of money I could only access partially at 25, provided I proved myself worthy. And I did. After 7 relentless years of work, I used part of that trust to make a down payment on an old craftsman house in the Pasadena suburbs. It wasn't a mansion, nothing flashy, but to me, it was everything. That house was my dream. A single-story wooden home with a wide porch, stained glass windows, and a small backyard garden. It was old, needed repairs, but I loved every crack in the hardwood floors, every chipped brick in the fireplace. I spent months fixing it up myself, sanding the floors, repainting the walls, replacing window panes. I even planted a rose garden in the backyard to honor my grandmother, who loved roses more than anything. Every time I stood in that garden, breathing in the sweet scent of the flowers, I felt like she was still there, smiling at me. But my parents and Brian? They never understood the value of that house. To them, it was just a pile of old wood. The kitchen's outdated. The walls are peeling. It's a waste of money to fix, my mother once mocked when I invited them over for dinner to show off my new home. Brian was worse. He scoffed, calling me crazy for investing in a chicken coop when I could have bought a modern downtown apartment. I just smiled because I knew they didn't get it. That house wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of the years I'd fought, the sleepless nights working, the times I told myself to be stronger. The difference between Brian and me wasn't just in our personalities, it was in how our parents treated us. While I scraped together every penny to buy my house, Brian was handed everything. A new car? Parents bought it. Pocket money? Mom slipped it into his hand every week. Credit card debt? Dad paid it off. I wasn't jealous, not really, but I couldn't help feeling the profound unfairness. I had done everything right, studied, worked, stood on my own 2 feet. Yet, every time I visited home, I'd hear my mother gush about Brian's new opportunities, or my father talk about how Brian was about to do something big. Brian's big moment never came. I remember one time, after I'd just been promoted at my consulting firm, I went home for dinner. As usual, Brian was complaining about being fired again. My boss didn't know how to use me, he said, holding a beer, glaring at me. Not everyone's as lucky as you, Garrett, always having everything handed to you. I was stunned. Lucky me? The one who worked himself to exhaustion to get where I am? But I didn't respond. I just ate my dinner in silence and left. I'd learned that arguing with Brian, or trying to explain things to my parents, was utterly pointless. Everything changed when I received a huge opportunity, a 6-week international consulting project in Europe, spanning London and Frankfurt. It was a pivotal project, the kind that could elevate my career to new heights. I was thrilled, but also anxious. 6 weeks was a long time, and I didn't want to leave my house empty. So, I asked my parents to look after it. Just stop by a few times, check the locks, water the rose garden, I said. A small task, right? But when I handed the house key to my father, a strange, uneasy feeling crept into my heart, as if I had just entrusted a piece of my soul to someone who didn't truly value it. The last dinner before my flight took place at my parents' house, that small home in Pasadena with the white picket fence and the smell of grilled meat from an old barbecue. I arrived in a light mood, hoping for a warm evening before heading out. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt that familiar atmosphere, my mother bustling in the kitchen, my father watching football, and Brian, as usual, complaining. He was sprawled on the sofa, phone in hand, his voice dripping with frustration. Work sucks. My boss keeps giving me pointless tasks. I can't waste my youth at that company. I glanced at him, resisting the urge to ask what these pointless tasks were. Instead, I nodded, sat down at the dinner table, and tried to focus on the plate of steak my mother had just brought out. Garrett, tell me about your Europe trip, my mother said. But I knew she was only asking out of courtesy. I started talking about the project, an international marketing campaign for a major corporation, requiring me to work in London and Frankfurt, meet executives, build strategies from scratch. It was a chance for a promotion, a chance to prove that my years of hard work hadn't been in vain. But as I spoke, my mother's eyes drifted to Brian, as if he were the one who needed attention. Brian's considering a new job, she interrupted, her voice brimming with excitement. A tech startup, they say it's very promising. I paused, the food in front of me suddenly losing its appeal. Brian, who had never held a job for more than 6 months, now had a promising opportunity. I looked at him, hoping to see some enthusiasm, but Brian just shrugged, eyes glued to his phone. Maybe, he mumbled. But it's stressful. I need a break first. I swallowed the question rising in my throat. A break? You've been on a break your whole life. My father, who usually stayed quiet during dinners like this, suddenly spoke up. Garrett, you're going away for so long. What about your house? I seized the chance to change the subject. Can you and Mom look after it for me? Just stop by a few times. Check the doors. Water the plants. I'll leave the key here. I pulled the key from my pocket and placed it on the table. My father nodded, but there was something distant in his eyes, as if his mind was elsewhere. All right, he said, then turned back to the TV. My mother patted Brian's shoulder, saying, my boy needs to relax. Work's so stressful, isn't it? I felt a heat rising in my chest. Stressful? Brian didn't know what stress was. He lived off our parents' money while I had paid for everything myself, from college tuition to every brick in my craftsman house. But I said nothing. I'd learned long ago that arguing with my family led nowhere. Instead, I stood up, thanked my mother for the meal, and handed the key to my father. I'm off. Say hi to Brian for me when he looks up from his phone, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Brian just glared at me, saying nothing. The next day, I boarded a flight to London. As the plane took off, I looked out the window, thinking about my house. I pictured the rose garden, its vibrant red petals glowing under the California sun. I told myself everything would be fine. My parents would look after the house, and I'd focus on my work. But deep down, a small voice warned me that I had just made a mistake. London greeted me with drizzle and a frenetic pace. The project started immediately, and I threw myself into work like a machine. Late-night meetings, endlessly revised plans, and presentations to executives left me with little time to breathe. But I loved it. I loved the challenge, the chance to prove myself. Each night back at the hotel, I checked emails, sent reports, and sometimes allowed myself to dream of returning home, walking into my craftsman house, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, gazing at the rose garden. But around the third week, I received a message from Brian. Not a check-in, not a greeting, just an Instagram link. I opened it and saw a series of photos of him in the Maldives, white sandy beaches, crystal clear infinity pools, and a luxurious bungalow with an ocean view. Brian, in a white linen shirt, was grinning beside a girl I'd never seen. The caption read, "Paradise found." Need more days like this. I sat there in my cold London hotel room, staring at my phone screen, feeling as if someone had punched me in the chest. The Maldives? Where did Brian get the money? He just lost his job, had piles of credit card debt, and my parents weren't rich enough to fund a lavish vacation like that. I texted back, "Looks nice. Who are you there with?" No reply. I called my mother, but she didn't pick up. I called my father, and after a few rings, it went to voicemail. Unease began to settle in, but I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe Brian borrowed money from friends, or won the lottery, or... I didn't know. I just knew something wasn't right. The following weeks, I tried to focus on work, but the image of Brian in the Maldives haunted me. I started checking his Instagram more often, like some unhealthy obsession. Each post was a fresh stab, a seafood dinner on the beach, cocktails in expensive glassware, a photo of him on a yacht with a smug grin. I didn't understand. Brian had no money and my parents couldn't afford this, or could they? I started calling home more often, but my parents' responses were always dismissive. "Garrett, everything's fine," my mother said in a brief call. "Your house is fine. Don't worry." But there was something strained in her voice, like she was hiding something. My father was even briefer, "I'm busy. Talk later." I tried to convince myself everything was okay, that I was imagining problems. But every night, lying in my hotel bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening behind my back. 6 weeks in Europe passed like a whirlwind. My project was a resounding success, with satisfied handshakes from executives and promises of a higher position when I returned to the States. But that joy wasn't enough to dispel the growing unease in my heart. Brian's Maldives photos and my parents' strange evasiveness were like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet see clearly. All I wanted was to go home, step into my craftsman house, sit on the porch, and look at my rose garden. I wanted to feel the peace I had spent my youth building. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, I took a deep breath, trying to push away the negative thoughts. Everything will be fine, I told myself, though the voice in my head wasn't very convincing. I took a taxi to my parents' house in Pasadena to retrieve my key. On the way, I checked Brian's Instagram one more time, like an addiction I couldn't shake. His latest post made me freeze. It was a selfie of Brian standing in front of a shiny new SUV, a smug grin on his face. The caption read, "Welcome to the new ride." My heart pounded. Brian didn't have money to buy a car. He had just lost his job, with debts piling up. So, where did this car come from? When the taxi pulled up to my parents' house, I noticed a detail that made my chest tighten. Parked in the driveway was a brand new sedan, gleaming under the California sun. Not Brian's SUV, but another expensive car. I stepped out of the taxi, gripping my phone tightly, feeling as if a boulder was pressing down on my shoulders. My father appeared at the front door, wearing a new shirt, his eyes cold and emotionless. "Come in, Garrett," he said, his voice low, but lacking its usual warmth. "We need to talk." I stepped inside, the air heavy, like the calm before a storm. My mother was sitting at the dining table, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes fixed on the floor. Brian wasn't there, but his presence loomed like a shadow. I set my suitcase down, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's my house key, Dad?" I asked, but the look in my parents' eyes told me the answer wouldn't be simple. My mother looked up, her lips pressed tight, then said, her voice trembling, "Garrett, your house. We sold it." The world around me seemed to stop. I stood frozen, my ears ringing as if someone had just punched me in the face. "Sold?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Sold my house? What do you mean?" My mother looked away, unable to meet my eyes. My father crossed his arms, his voice firm. "We needed the money, Garrett. Brian needed a fresh start. He deserved to enjoy himself a little. And I needed a new car." I stared at my father, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. "My house," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I spent my whole life buying it. Every dollar, every hour of work, every callus on my hands from fixing it up. You sold it to buy a car for you and to pay for Brian's Maldives trip. I was almost shouting, but my father just shrugged as if it were obvious. You're always fine, Garrett, he said. You have a good job. You have money. Brian doesn't. He needs us. I felt my blood boil. Brian's 30 years old. He can't hold a job for more than 6 months, and you still coddle him like a child. I turned to my mother, hoping for some remorse, but she just pressed her lips together, muttering, You don't understand, Garrett. Brian stressed. He needed a vacation to recharge. A vacation? I laughed bitterly, feeling like the world was mocking me. A vacation in the Maldives at a 5-star resort with his girlfriend and friends? And you sold my house to pay for that? To buy new cars? I stepped forward, grabbing my mother's hand, searching for a glimmer of hope that this was just a misunderstanding. But her eyes told me everything, the cold, undeniable truth. My Craftsman house, where I had poured my sweat and tears, where I had planted a rose garden to honor my grandmother, now belonged to someone else. My father opened a drawer, pulled out a stack of crumpled bills, and placed it on the table. This is what's left after we sold the house, he said, looking at the crumpled stack of money on the table. I nearly lost it. I stormed out of my parents' house, leaving the key, the money, and refusing to hear another word from them. I took a taxi to my house, or rather, what used to be my house. When the taxi stopped in front of the Craftsman house, my heart felt like it was being crushed. The stained glass windows were still there, but the curtains had changed. My rose garden looked different, as if someone had tampered with it. I stepped out of the taxi, stood at the gate, and then I saw them, an elderly couple watering plants in the front yard. The woman looked up and smiled at me. Hello, she said, her voice friendly. Can I help you? My throat felt dry. This was my house, I said, my voice trembling. The man stopped watering, looking at me with confusion. Your house? Are you Garrett? We bought this house a month ago from your parents. They said you'd moved abroad to live. I stepped back, my mind reeling. My parents didn't just sell my house. They lied, fabricating a story to justify their actions. I returned to the taxi, unsure of what to do. I called David, my best friend from college, now a junior lawyer. David, I need to see you right now, I said, my voice choked. David agreed to meet me at a nearby coffee shop. There, I poured out the whole story, from Brian's lavish Maldives trip, his new car, my father's new car, to the biggest shock of all, my Craftsman house had been sold behind my back. Every word felt like a knife cutting into my heart. But I tried to stay calm, hoping David could help me make sense of it. David listened, his brows furrowed, his expression pensive. When I finished, he tapped his fingers lightly on the table as if organizing my words in his mind. Garrett, David said, his voice low but steady. Your house, it's not just personal property, is it? I mean, you mentioned you used part of your grandfather's trust fund to buy it, right? I nodded, feeling a spark of light in the darkness. My grandfather Norman's trust fund. I had used part of the trust to make the down payment on the house, but it was still tied to the trust, and I was the primary trustee until I turned 35. If your parents sold the house without your consent, that could be illegal, David said, his eyes lighting up. But I'm not sure about the specific terms of the trust. You need to meet with the lawyer handling the trust, Mr. Harrison, right? He's an experienced lawyer and known for being fair. I'm confident he can help you seek justice, but you'll need to gather evidence. Documents, contracts, anything that proves they did this behind your back. I sat there, my heart pounding. David's words were like a lifeline in the storm. I vaguely recalled conversations with my grandfather about the trust, about how he wanted to protect the assets for the next generation. I think he mentioned a protective clause that anyone who intentionally misappropriated trust assets would forfeit their inheritance. Do you think I have a chance? I asked, my voice trembling. David gripped my shoulder, his eyes resolute. Find Mr. Harrison. Gather evidence. I'm certain you have a strong case here. I left the coffee shop, my mind a whirlwind, but with a flicker of hope. I hadn't just lost my house. I'd lost my sense of security, my trust in my family. But if David was right, if I could prove my parents and Brian had gone too far, I might be able to reclaim what was mine. The image of my rose garden flashed in my mind, but it was overshadowed by my father's cold face, my mother's evasive eyes, and Brian's smug smile on Instagram. I clenched my fists, determination burning inside me. They thought they could take everything from me and walk away unscathed. They were wrong. I would uncover the truth, and I would make them pay. I immediately called Mr. Harrison, the lawyer handling my grandfather Norman's trust. I had only met him a few times, the last being when I was 25, when he explained the basic terms of the trust, and I was allowed to use a portion of the funds to buy my Craftsman house. His voice over the phone was as deep and calm as I remembered, but there was a hint of concern when I told him I needed to see him right away. "Garrett, are you okay?" he asked. "No," I replied, my voice hoarse. "I need your help. Something big has happened." We arranged to meet at his office in downtown Pasadena, a small building with polished oak panels and the smell of old paper. When I walked in, Mr. Harrison stood up from behind his desk, his white hair and round glasses making him look like a character from a classic novel. He shook my hand, his eyes sharp but warm. "Sit down, Garrett," he said, gesturing to a leather chair across from him. "Tell me what's going on." I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the emotions threatening to spill over. I told him everything, from my 6-week business trip in Europe, Brian's Maldives photos, my father's new car, to the biggest shock. My parents had sold my Craftsman house without consulting me. They said they needed the money for Brian, for his fresh start, I said, my voice trembling with anger. "But that was my house, Mr. Harrison. I used money from my grandfather's trust to buy it. How could they sell it without my permission?" Mr. Harrison listened, his hand resting on his chin, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he sat in silence for a moment, then stood and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He pulled out a thick folder bound in dark brown leather with Norman Miller Trust elegantly embossed on the cover. "Garrett," he said, his voice low but weighty, "that house isn't just your personal property. It belongs to the trust, and you are the sole trustee until you turn 35. If your parents sold it without your permission, that's a serious matter." My heart pounded as if a ray of light had pierced the darkness. "How serious, Mr. Harrison?" I asked, my voice dropping to a near whisper. He opened the folder, flipped through a few pages, and pointed to a highlighted paragraph. "Let me explain the trust clearly," he said. "When you turn 35, the trust's assets will be distributed as follows. Your parents, Robert and Linda Miller, each receive $500,000. Your brother, Brian Miller, also receives $500,000. You, Garrett, receive $1 million. Additionally, you have full access to that $1 million before you turn 35, as you did when you used part of it to buy the house. But your parents and brother can only receive their shares when you turn 35, and only if they comply with the trust's terms." I nodded, trying to process the information. "And if they don't comply?" I asked, sensing that the answer was about to change everything. Mr. Harrison looked me straight in the eye, his gaze sharp as a blade. "There's a very clear clause in the trust, Garrett. Any beneficiary who forges, misappropriates, or sells trust assets without the trustee's consent, that's you, will immediately forfeit their inheritance. Not only do they lose their share, but they could also face legal consequences depending on the specifics of their actions." I sat there stunned, feeling as if the ground beneath me was shifting. Forfeit their inheritance? My parents' $500,000, Brian's $500,000. All of it could vanish because of what they'd done. I remembered my grandfather's words, "Your strength is your true asset." Was this his way of protecting me, of safeguarding what I'd built? "So, you're saying if I can prove they forged or misappropriated the house, they lose everything?" I asked, my voice trembling. Not from fear, but from a strange mix of pain and satisfaction. Mr. Harrison nodded. "Exactly. But we need evidence, Garrett. Documents, contracts, signatures, anything that proves they acted behind your back. If they forged your signature or used illegal means to sell the house, we could not only recover the property, but also activate the forfeiture clause." He paused, looking at me with a sympathetic gaze. "But you need to prepare yourself. This isn't just a legal matter. This is your family." Family? The words stabbed at my heart. My parents, who had raised me, had become betrayers. Brian, the brother I'd once hoped would grow up, was part of this scheme. My eyes stung, but I refused to let tears fall. "I understand, Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "What do I need to do next?" Mr. Harrison placed a hand on my shoulder the way my grandfather used to. You need to gather evidence, he said. Find out how they sold the house, who bought it, and how the paperwork was signed. If there's any sign of forgery, signatures, notarizations, anything, we'll have grounds to act. I'll support you every step of the way, from filing a lawsuit to enforcing the trust's clauses. But you have to be strong, Garrett. This won't be easy. I nodded. A surge of determination, stronger than ever before, rose within me. I thought of my Craftsman house, the rose garden I'd planted to honor my grandmother, the nights I'd stayed up working to build my life. They had taken it all, but I wouldn't let them win. I'll find the evidence, I said, my voice firm. And I'll take back what's mine. As I left Mr. Harrison's office, I felt like I was stepping into a battle. The Pasadena sun still shone brightly, but inside me was a storm. I pulled out my phone and texted David. You were right. There's a protective clause in the trust. I'll need your help. I didn't know exactly where to start, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't stop until the truth was exposed. I thought of my parents, of Brian, of the times they made me feel like I wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy. They thought I'd stay silent, accept the loss, and move on. But they didn't know I was Norman Miller's grandson, the man who taught me that true strength lies in will. And my will now was an unquenchable fire. I decided to start at the most painful place, my Craftsman house. I needed to meet Ellen and George, the elderly couple, again, to dig deeper into the sale. The last time I stood in front of the house and learned they had moved in, I only knew that my parents had sold it, using a forged signature of mine, but I needed more details. Who met with them, what the exact paperwork was, and if there were any other clues. In the taxi, on the way there, I clenched my fists, trying to suppress the feeling that my heart was being crushed. The Craftsman house appeared before me, with its familiar stained glass windows and the rose garden, now unevenly trimmed like an unhealed wound. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. Ellen opened it, her eyes recognizing me immediately. Her friendly smile now tinged with worry. Garrett, you're back, she said, her voice soft but tense, as if she sensed I wasn't there just to say hello. Come in. I stepped into the living room where George was sitting, a newspaper in hand, but his eyes fixed on me, wary. Mr. Garrett, he said, putting the paper down. What's new? Last time you mentioned something about the house. We're still not sure what's going on. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm, but unable to hide my determination. Ellen, George, I'm sorry to bother you again, but I need to know more about the sale. I believe my parents forged documents to sell this house. I need evidence to take back what's mine. Ellen and George exchanged glances. Then she stood and retrieved a stack of papers from a drawer. We don't want to be caught up in any trouble, Ellen said, her voice low. They, your parents, and your brother, said you were moving abroad and needed to sell quickly. They brought a deed of transfer with your signature and notarized documents. We paid in cash, and everything was finalized in a few days. I held the papers, my heart racing. The sale contract was in my father's name, Robert Miller, with the signature purportedly mine on the deed of transfer. But it wasn't my signature. It was close, very close, but there were shaky, uneven strokes, as if someone had tried to mimic it. This isn't my signature, I said, my voice catching. George frowned. They also provided a notarized document confirming everything was legal. We had no reason to suspect otherwise. I asked permission to photograph the documents, feeling like I had found the first piece of the puzzle. Ellen looked at me, her eyes full of concern. If you're telling the truth, we're victims too. We paid for the house, moved in. If something's wrong, we need to know. I nodded, promising to follow up with them. As I left the house, I felt a mix of relief and simmering anger. My parents had forged my signature, but I needed more evidence to tie it all together. Back at the temporary rental I'd taken, I contacted David again. He agreed to help me analyze the documents and suggested checking for related paperwork at my parents' house. If they took original documents from your house, they might still have them, David said. The thought of returning to my parents' house made me shudder. But I knew I had no choice. I had to confront them, not to argue, but to act discreetly. I went in my parents' house one morning, knowing they'd be out grocery shopping. I slipped inside and quietly opened their filing cabinet. Inside were stacks of documents, bills, contracts, insurance papers. My heart raced when I found a folder labeled Garrett's House. I opened it, and it was the treasure I needed. Copies of the deed of transfer, notarized documents, and handwritten notes. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. Numbers, dates, and a note that read, "All cash offer, quick and clean." But what chilled me was the notarized document. The notary was listed as John Thompson, but the notary's signature looked sloppy, unprofessional. I photographed everything, carefully put it all back, and left before my parents returned. I now had nearly enough evidence, but I wanted to understand Brian's role in this. He wasn't just a beneficiary of the sale proceeds. He might have been part of the plan. I went back to Brian's Instagram, reviewing his Maldives posts. One photo showed him with an unfamiliar man, both standing in front of a real estate office. I zoomed in and recognized the logo of a local real estate company. This was a lead. I visited the real estate office, posing as a potential home buyer to gather information. The agent, a woman named Avery, was eager to assist. When I subtly steered the conversation toward the Craftsman house, she nodded. "Oh, the house on Oak Street? That was a quick deal." The seller was Brian Miller, who said his brother was moving abroad and needed to sell fast. We found a cash buyer right away. I kept my expression neutral, though rage boiled inside me. "Brian handled everything himself?" I asked. Avery nodded. He brought all the paperwork, including his brother's signature and notarized documents. We had no reason to doubt it. I left the office, my mind reeling. Brian didn't just know about the sale. He was the one who executed it. My father forged the notarization. My mother forged my signature. And Brian handled the transaction. They had worked together perfectly to steal everything from me. But they made a critical mistake. They didn't know the house was tied to the trust, and I had Mr. Harrison on my side. I contacted Mr. Harrison again, sending him all the evidence: the deed with the forged signature, the questionable notarized document, and the information from the real estate agency. He reviewed it, his voice over the phone calm but resolute. "Garrett, this is strong evidence. A forged signature and notarization are serious legal violations. We can file a lawsuit to reclaim the house, and the forfeiture clause will be activated. But you need to be certain about this. Once we proceed, your family will never be the same." I fell silent, thinking of my parents, of Brian, of the family dinners that were now just memories. "They destroyed our family first, Mr. Harrison," I said. "I'm just taking back what's mine." He agreed, promising to prepare the legal documents. "Stay calm, Garrett," he said. "We'll do this the right way." When I hung up, I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room, looking at myself. I was no longer the Garrett from 6 weeks ago, who believed his family would never betray him. I was someone new, forged by pain and determination. I thought of my grandfather, my rose garden, my Craftsman house. I would take it all back, not just for me, but for the promise I kept to him. True strength lies in will. After the call with Mr. Harrison, I knew I had enough evidence. The deed of transfer with a forged signature, the fraudulent notarized document, and confirmation from the real estate agency that Brian was the one who facilitated the sale. But filing a lawsuit wasn't enough. I wanted my parents and Brian to face the truth in front of the entire family, in front of the relatives who had watched me grow up, who had heard my parents boast about their golden boy, Brian. I wanted them to see the consequences of their actions, not through a cold legal letter, but in person, in a moment they couldn't escape. I called Aunt Susan, my mother's older sister, who was always fair and straightforward. She was the only family member who had ever praised my efforts, who said my grandfather would be proud of me. "Aunt Susan," I said over the phone, keeping my emotions in check. "I want to organize a family gathering. Invite everyone. Aunts, uncles, cousins. I have something important to say." She hesitated, sensing the gravity in my voice. "Garrett, is something wrong?" she asked. I only replied, "I need everyone there. I'll explain later." I chose a weekend and borrowed Aunt Susan's house for the gathering. I told her it was a family update after my business trip. I didn't reveal the details, but told my mother I wanted to make peace after recent tensions. My mother, perhaps out of guilt or confidence that I had accepted the loss of my house, agreed immediately. "That's good, Garrett," she said, her voice relieved. "The family needs to come together. Brian will be happy to see his big brother." I clenched my jaw, suppressing my anger. They didn't know this gathering wasn't about reconciliation. It was about exposing the truth. I contacted Mr. Harrison, inviting him to attend as a family friend. He agreed, bringing the trust documents and the evidence I had collected. Are you sure you want to do this in front of the whole family, Garrett? He asked, his voice low but concerned. This will be a big shock. I nodded over the phone. They chose this path, Mr. Harrison. I'm just helping them see where it leads. On the day of the gathering, I arrived at Aunt Susan's house early to help set up tables and prepare food. She looked at me, her eyes full of worry. Garrett, are you okay? You seem different. I gave her a strange smile and patted her shoulder. I'm fine, Aunt Susan. Today's an important day. Family members started arriving. Uncle Paul, cousins, a few close family friends. Everyone was laughing and hugging as if this were just a normal gathering, but my heart was pounding like a warrior preparing for battle. My parents arrived, my father in his new shirt, my mother in a light blue dress, her smile forced but confident. Brian showed up late, strutting in with his usual smug demeanor, wearing a white linen shirt like the one in his Maldives photos. He clapped me on the shoulder, saying loudly, "Big bro, you're back. How was Europe? Don't be mad about the house thing. Life's too long for that." I looked into his eyes, seeing his arrogance untainted by remorse. I just nodded, giving a faint smile. Yeah, Brian, life's long. Once everyone was settled around the tables in the backyard, I stood up, holding a glass of wine, but not drinking. The lively chatter quieted, all eyes turning to me. Thank you all for coming today, I began, my voice calm but resonant. I just returned from 6 weeks in Europe, working on a major project. But today, I don't want to talk about work. I want to talk about family, about truth, trust, and what we do to each other. My mother looked at me, a flicker of worry in her eyes. My father crossed his arms, frowning. Brian smirked, as if expecting an apology or reconciliation. I set the wine glass down and pulled a stack of papers from my bag, copies of the deed, the forged notarized document, and photos from the real estate agency. When I went on my trip, I asked my parents to look after my Craftsman house, I continued, my voice slow but icy. The house I bought with my sweat, tears, and part of the funds from Grandpa Norman's trust. But when I returned, I found out my parents sold it without asking me. Murmurs rose around the table, and Aunt Susan covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Some cousins exchanged confused glances. My mother stood up, her voice trembling. Garrett, what are you doing? This isn't the place for this. I raised a hand, gesturing for her to sit. No, Mom. This is exactly the place. Everyone needs to know the truth. I held up the papers. This is the deed of transfer for the house. It has my signature, but I didn't sign it. This is a notarized document, signed by someone named John H. Thompson, but the signature is fake. And this, I pulled out my phone, showing the photo of Brian in front of the real estate office, is proof that Brian facilitated the sale, lying that I was moving abroad for work. The air grew heavy. Brian's face paled, and he forced a laugh. What? What are you making up, Garrett? Don't blow this out of proportion. I locked eyes with him, feeling all my pain and anger surge. Making it up? Let Mr. Harrison explain. I gestured to Mr. Harrison, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table. He stood, holding the trust documents, his voice low but commanding. I am the attorney managing the Norman Miller Trust, he began. The Craftsman house belongs to the trust, with Garrett as the sole trustee. Selling it without his consent was illegal, but more critically, the trust has a clear clause. Anyone who forges, misappropriates, or sells trust assets will immediately forfeit their inheritance. Gasps echoed around the table. My mother covered her face. My father sat frozen, his hands trembling. Brian slammed the table, shouting, What? What are you talking about? It's just an old house. Mr. Harrison looked at him, his voice cold. Not just the house, Mr. Brian. You and your parents have forfeited $500,000 each from the trust, a total of $1 million, plus the vacation cabin in Big Bear. Furthermore, forging signatures and notarizations is a criminal offense. You will face legal consequences. Silence fell, broken only by the soft rustle of the wind in the backyard. My mother clutched her face, stifling sobs. My father approached Mr. Harrison, demanding to see the trust documents. Brian slammed the table again, yelling, What? Grandpa had that much money and left it all to Garrett? Why didn't anyone tell me? He turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. Garrett, you knew about this and said nothing. How selfish are you? I looked at Brian, feeling like I was staring at a spoiled child. Selfish, I replied, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. I worked my whole life to prove I was worthy of Grandpa's trust. You, Brian, only took handouts from Mom and Dad, living off deceit. Grandpa put me in charge of the trust because he believed I'd use it wisely. And now you've all stripped yourselves of your own inheritance. My mother rushed to me, grabbing my hand, tears streaming down her face. Garrett, I'm sorry. I didn't know about the trust. I just wanted to help Brian. You're his big brother. You can forgive us, right? You can share the inheritance as planned. My father turned, his voice hoarse. Garrett, we're family. You can't let us lose everything like this. Think it over. Brian jumped in, his tone almost pleading. Big bro, please think it over. $2 million in inheritance isn't small. I looked at them. My mother with tear-filled eyes, my father with a defeated expression, Brian with his childish anger. Part of me wanted to forgive, to hug my mother and say everything would be okay. But then I remembered my rose garden, my craftsman house, and my grandfather's words, your strength is your true asset. They had chosen to betray me. Chosen Brian over justice. You're not my family, I said, my voice calm but cutting. Family doesn't steal each other's dreams. My mother collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. My father held her, unable to meet my eyes. Brian stormed out of the backyard, muttering curses. The other family members looked at me. Some nodded. Others quietly left. Aunt Susan came to my side, placing a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing, Garrett, she said. Your grandfather would be proud. As everyone left, I stood in the backyard, watching the sunset paint the Pasadena sky golden. Mr. Harrison patted my shoulder. You did what you had to, he said. The legal documents are ready. We'll reclaim your house, and they'll pay the price. I nodded, but inside, I didn't feel victorious. There was only an emptiness where my love for my family once was. In the days following the family gathering, I felt like I was living in a whirlwind. Mr. Harrison and his legal team sprang into action, filing a lawsuit in the Pasadena court with serious charges, forged signatures, fraudulent notarization, and misappropriation of trust assets. I spent hours in his office reviewing every document, every piece of evidence I had gathered, from the forged deed of transfer to my mother's handwritten notes, from the fake notarized document to the real estate agency's confirmation of Brian's role. Each piece was a knife, reminding me of the betrayal, but also a step toward justice. The police moved quickly. One morning, I received a call from Mr. Harrison. Garrett, they've opened a criminal investigation. Your parents and Brian have been summoned for questioning. I sat down in my hotel room chair, my hands trembling as I held the phone. Images of my mother sobbing at the gathering, my father with his head bowed, and Brian storming off flashed through my mind. I didn't want them to go to jail, but I couldn't let them escape the consequences either. What will they be charged with? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Harrison replied, his tone steady but clear. Your parents face charges of forgery and fraud. Brian is being charged with complicity and profiting from criminal proceeds. We have solid evidence, Garrett. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. What about my house? I asked. Mr. Harrison reassured me. We're working with the buyers, Ellen and George. They're victims, too, so the court may void the sale and refund their money. You'll get your house back, but it will take a few months. I hung up, staring out the window. The Pasadena sunlight was as radiant as the day I returned, but it no longer felt warm. The investigation moved faster than I expected. I recounted my business trip, the shock of discovering my house had been sold, and the evidence I'd collected. The officer, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, took meticulous notes. We've checked the notarized document, he said. The person listed as John H. Thompson doesn't exist in the notary registry. The signature on the deed of transfer has also been confirmed as forged through handwriting analysis. A jolt ran through me. What does that mean? I asked. The officer looked at me, his voice calm but firm. Your parents will be charged with forgery and fraud. They could face probation and restitution. Your brother Brian will be charged with complicity, and he'll have to repay all the money he used from the house sale, including the costs of his Maldives trip. I left the police station, my mind reeling. Probation, restitution, repayment. The words echoed in my head like a grim song. I didn't want my family destroyed, but I couldn't forgive them either. They had chosen this path, chosen to steal my dream, to feed Brian's laziness. I thought of my grandfather, of his words, "Your strength is your true asset." He was right. My strength wasn't in the house. It was in my determination to seek justice. In the weeks that followed, my family unraveled. My parents were formally charged, receiving 3 years of probation and a substantial restitution order, mostly the money they'd gained from selling my house. They were forced to mortgage their Pasadena home where I grew up to cover the debt. Aunt Susan told me my mother cried every night while my father barely spoke, sitting silently in front of the TV. Brian faced harsher consequences. The court ordered him to repay the full cost of his Maldives trip, over $20,000, and fined him for complicity. With no more financial support from our parents and no trust fund, Brian was left to face reality. No job, no home, and a massive debt. I saw him once, passing by a coffee shop in downtown Pasadena. He was sitting there in a crumpled t-shirt, eyes shadowed, talking on the phone about job applications. When he saw me, he turned away, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't stop. I had nothing left to say to him. After 5 long months, I received news from Mr. Harrison. The court had voided the sale of the Craftsman house. Ellen and George were refunded, and the house was officially returned to my name. The day I received the keys, I stood in front of the house, a mix of joy and sorrow washing over me. The stained glass windows were still there, but the rose garden had withered from neglect. I stepped inside. The familiar smell of wood filling my senses, but it wasn't the same. The house had once been my dream, but now it carried the scars of betrayal. I spent days cleaning and restoring, trying to bring back its old beauty. But every crack in the wall, every brick in the fireplace reminded me of what I'd lost. Not just property, but my trust in my family. I stood in the backyard looking at the wilted rose bushes, wondering if I could revive them or if I could revive myself. My family was no longer what it was. Aunt Susan stayed in touch, but other relatives drifted away. A few cousins called, offering sympathy, but no one mentioned the gathering. My parents tried to reach out, leaving voicemails with apologies, but I didn't respond. It wasn't that I didn't want to forgive. It was that I wasn't ready. Maybe one day I'd sit down with them, but not now. Brian disappeared from my radar. I heard he'd moved to another city, working odd jobs to pay off his debt. Part of me felt sorry for him, but a larger part reminded me he'd chosen this path. He could have grown up, stood on his own, but instead he chose to live off deceit. I sat on the porch of my Craftsman house, a cold cup of coffee in my hand. The house was mine again, but it wasn't the place I'd once dreamed of. It was a trophy, a testament to my will, but also a reminder of the cost of justice. I thought of my grandfather, the trust, and how he'd protected me even after he was gone. I wondered if he knew that one day I'd need the strength he'd instilled in me. I stood up, walked to the backyard, and began pulling weeds and watering the surviving rose bushes. Maybe they'd bloom again. Maybe not. But I would try, as I always had. Justice had been served, but my journey wasn't over. I would rebuild not just the house, but my life, one step at a time. While restoring the house, I began thinking about the trust fund, the $1 million I would receive when I turned 35, now just a few months away. My parents and Brian had forfeited their inheritance, and the $1.5 million along with the vacation cabin in Big Bear now belonged to me. But I didn't want to keep it all for myself. My grandfather had taught me that true wealth lies not in money, but in what you leave behind for the world. I decided to establish the Norman Miller Foundation, a scholarship fund for young people who, like me 20 years ago, worked tirelessly and counted every penny to pursue their dreams. I used a portion of the trust fund to launch it, providing tuition assistance for students facing financial hardship, but with strong determination. As I signed the paperwork to establish the foundation in Mr. Harrison's office, I felt my grandfather's presence, as if he were there, smiling at me. "Well done, Garrett," I imagined him saying. "This is true strength." The scholarship fund quickly gained attention. A few local Pasadena newspapers ran stories, calling me the man who turned pain into hope. I didn't care for the spotlight, but I was proud when I received thank you letters from students. One girl wrote, "Thank you, Garrett. Because of your scholarship, I can continue college and become a doctor." Reading those words, I felt that my craftsman house, my rose garden, and even my scars had meaning. My family became a distant memory. I heard they moved to a small apartment in the suburbs, living quietly and avoiding relatives. Once, my mother sent me a handwritten letter, her shaky handwriting filled with remorse. Garrett, I'm sorry. I only wanted to help Brian, but I was wrong. If you can forgive me, I'm willing to do anything. I read the letter and left it on the table for days, but I didn't respond. It wasn't that I didn't want to forgive. It was that I didn't know how to mend what had been shattered. Brian, from what I heard, was living alone, withdrawn, and seemed to have changed after the shock of losing his inheritance. I didn't know if he was truly remorseful, but I hoped for his own sake that one day he would find his path. One afternoon, I sat on the porch of my craftsman house, a hot cup of coffee in hand, gazing at the rose garden, now blooming vibrantly again. The red petals glowed under the sunlight, a reminder that life could be revived even after the deepest wounds. This house, once a symbol of my dream, was now a symbol of resilience. I had lost my family, but I had found the strength my grandfather always believed I possessed. I reflected on my journey, from the shock of discovering my house had been sold, to the quiet days of investigation, to the moment I confronted my parents and Brian in front of the family. In America, forging signatures to steal property isn't uncommon, and the most painful part is that it can come from those closest to you. But my story is proof that justice and truth always find a way to prevail. My parents and Brian paid a price, not just in money, but in honor and trust. I wasn't happy about it, but I didn't regret standing up for myself. I stood up, went inside, and took an old framed photo of my grandfather, placing it on the fireplace. He was smiling in the picture, his eyes bright, as if he knew I would overcome. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered. Then I returned to the garden, picked up the watering can, and continued tending to the surviving rose bushes. My life, like this garden, would keep blooming. Not because I had everything, but because I never gave up.